Ballooning is the oldest form of flight. Before 1783, man had only dreamed of flying like a bird. It was two brothers, Joseph and Etienne Montgolfier, who, as legend has it, noticed that smoke from a fireplace caused a woman's big hoop skirt to billow out and rise up. Since they were paper makers, they made a paper balloon, and in June 1783 filled it with smoke and set it free. Then 3 months later, they launched another paper balloon, this time with a rooster, duck, and sheep on board. The rooster and duck were included since they are birds, while the sheep's physiology closely resembled that of a human. The 8-minute flight covered 2 miles after launching from Versailles, France. 2 months later, in November 1783, the Montgolfier brothers launched another paper balloon, this time with 2 men on board. King Louis XIV originally wanted to send convicts in the balloon, but scientist Pilatre de Rosière and Marquis François d'Arlandre convinced the king the first people to fly should not be criminals. The 25-minute flight covered some 5 miles. They could have flown longer, except the fire providing the smoke threatened to consume the paper envelope, so the men landed it. It should be pointed out that the word pilot comes from Pilatre, and hot air balloons in Europe are still called Montgolfiers. About the same time, other Frenchmen were working on the development of a gas balloon. Based on previous work with hydrogen, Jacques Charles designed and the Robert brothers built a balloon capable of containing hydrogen. The first inflation took 4 days, and the balloon was released without any passengers. It flew for 45 minutes, landing some 21 kilometers away, terrorizing local peasants who destroyed the balloon with pitchforks and knives. Just a few days after the first manned hot air balloon flight, Charles and one of the Robert brothers took to the air in another hydrogen balloon. The 2-hour flight took the aeronauts about 36 kilometers, landing at sunset. Upon landing, Robert got out of the balloon, and due to the lack of weight, the balloon ascended again, giving Charles a second view of the sun. While he never flew in a gas balloon again, gas balloons are named Charlier in his honor. During the next 100 years or so, gas balloons were used for various purposes in flights, including military purposes, while hot air balloons seemed to lose favor, probably due to the danger of having a live fire on board. Although there were the smoke balloons that traveled the state fair circuits, with the pilot becoming a parachutist once the balloon reached a certain altitude. In the 1950s, Ed Yost, working for the U.S. Navy, developed what has become the modern hot air balloon. Using a burner, burning propane to heat the air, Yost flew the first successful modern hot air balloon in October of 1960. Refinements in fabric and burner efficiency have continued to this day. Up until recently, gas balloons looked very similar to the early gas balloons. A bag of fabric filled with gas covered with a net attached to the basket below. Altitude is controlled by a valve to release gas to come down, and bags of sand that are dumped to go up. In the last 30 years, the so-called quick-fill gas balloon system has nearly replaced all the netted balloons. These balloons are a more natural shape, with vertical support lines instead of a net covering the envelope. The modern hot air balloon is usually made of ripstop nylon and has a basket or gondola made of wicker. Wicker is the preferred material because it is sturdy, flexible, and relatively lightweight. The flexibility also helps cushion the impact at landing. Envelope sizes vary as well, with the most common size balloon holding 90,000 cubic feet of air. Many special shapes and most commercial ride balloons are usually much larger. An entire flight operation goes something like this. The system is pulled off the truck or out of the trailer. The burner is connected to the tanks and checked for the proper fuel pressure and lack of leaks. The envelope is then attached to the gondola and stretched out. A gas-powered fan is started to blow cold air into the envelope. Crew members hold the throat of the balloon open to allow the cold air in. After about 10 minutes, when the envelope is full of cold air, the pilot lights the burner and heats the air inside the envelope. As the air heats up, it becomes lighter than the outside colder air, and the balloon begins to stand up. Another crew member is holding onto the crown line, the rope attached to the top of the balloon. The crew person uses the crown line to stabilize the balloon during inflation. Then it's time to load the passengers, make final flight preparations, and with more heat in the balloon, you're airborne. Pilots cannot steer a balloon. The only controls are the burners to add heat to go up and a vent line to release heat from the top of the balloon, thus cooling the air inside the balloon, and it descends. However, winds blow different directions and speeds at different altitudes, so a pilot, by controlling the altitude of the balloon, does have some control over the direction of flight. Balloons usually carry 20 to 40 gallons of propane on board, which, depending on the weight of the system, including passengers and the outside temperature and weather conditions, usually allows for an hour or two of flight time. After landing, the pilot uses the vent to release the hot air, and the balloon, with the help of the crew, lays back down on the ground. After squeezing all of the air out of the envelope so it fits back in the bag, and the disconnecting of the burner from the propane tanks, everything is loaded back in the truck or trailer. Then it's time for a celebration, especially if a passenger has just taken their first hot air balloon ride. Many first-time passengers end up joining a balloon crew, and many crew members go on to become pilots. In order to be able to legally pilot a hot air balloon, you must take ground school, pass a knowledge test, and undergo flight training. This training includes a minimum of 10 hours of flight time, with a solo flight, a flight to 2,000 feet above the ground, and the successful completion of a check ride and oral exam with an FAA examiner. You must be 16 to take the check ride, and when successful, you are issued a pilot certificate, allowing you to fly lighter-than-air aircraft with an airborne heater. Pilots must undergo ground instruction and a flight review flight every 2 years, and must have 3 landings and takeoffs in the previous 90 days in order to carry passengers. These rules and regulations, and a host of others, are overseen by the Federal Aviation Administration, or the FAA, which governs all aircraft, including balloons, in the United States. There is an equivalent agency in most other countries. A balloon system must undergo an inspection every year or 100 hours of flight time, whichever comes first. It is this inspection that determines if the balloon meets the manufacturer's specification for airworthiness. New balloon systems average about $35,000 to $45,000, although used systems can be obtained for much less, and special shaped balloons can cost in the 6-figure range. With advances in fabric, the life of a balloon is now about 600 hours of flight time, although this can vary greatly depending on the care given the balloon by the pilot and crew. Hot air balloons tend to fly as soon after sunrise as possible. That's when the atmosphere is the most stable. A few hours after sunrise, the sun has warmed the ground enough that thermals can develop. These columns of rising warm air spiral skyward and displace the air above, causing downdrafts, which can greatly impact the flight of the balloon. Balloons also don't fly at night, as it's impossible to see the ground for landing. While dawn patrol balloons will take off before sunrise, they need to fly until after the sun comes up in order to find a safe landing spot. Albuquerque saw its first balloon in 1882, when Park Van Tassel inflated a coal gas balloon near 2nd and Gold as part of a 4th of July celebration. After an inflation that lasted more than a day, Van Tassel flew about 30 to 40 minutes. Hot air ballooning came to Albuquerque in 1971, when Sid Cutter decided he needed a hot air balloon as a decoration for his mother's World War I themed birthday party. The day after the party, Sid and his brother took the balloon for a spin.
He threw a thermos of coffee in. What are you doing? He says, "Oh, just in case we get up there and the view's pretty, we want to have some coffee." I said, "Well, I'm coming back down. We're going to go have breakfast." Well, somehow I didn't tell the ground crew that. And so we get to the end of the rope, and they let go of the rope. Well, it started drifting towards power lines, and so I had to go up. My brother started pulling in the rope so we didn't drag it across the power lines. I got to 300 feet, so I sat down on the tank and pulled this little chain that kept the burners going, and it turned out it was one of those perfect days for ballooning.
The Cutter family continued to fly the balloon around Albuquerque, eventually attracting the attention of radio station KOB. And that's when the idea for the Albuquerque International Balloon Fiesta was born.